Hey everyone, we're back for another midweek conversation. My name is Joe Eric and I'm here with my beautiful wife, Dell, and we are pastors here at LTL.Church on staff, and I'm excited to have this conversation. We switched sides, so now I get to ask you some questions today, but we're not alone, right? We are here with our
live studio
audience here. We got Sly, Daniel, Jacob, the whole crew is here, and so if you hear them laughing, we're not in a room by ourselves awkwardly, just with other cameras. So we got people here.
We literally set up the camera and we're just talking.
So we are excited to continue to have these conversations. They've been so meaningful, even just kind of being here. And again, we do these midweek conversations with the purpose behind to lead by example, because we really believe at LTL.Church that transformation happens, yes, on a Sunday, but man, it happens when we walk out our faith, live it out, not just hearing God's word on a Sunday, but living it out, applying it to our lives Monday through Saturday. And part of that looks like having conversations with the people around you, other believers around you, and on the phone call, on the rise to school, because school's starting back up. Come on, shout out to all the parents.
Shout out to fall. Oh my God.
And it's having conversations in the locker room, having conversations around the dinner table with your family, right? They matter. And so really we're here to kind of lead that conversation based off of the topics we talk about on Sunday, which are so practical and easy to talk about. So today I want to talk about living a life devoted to Christ. I mean, I think every person that is watching, every person that is living right now is devoted. We are devoted beings, right? We're devoted to something, meaning we live with valuing something, right? You devote time, energy, money to the things you value. So if you're saying, oh, I don't live a devoted life, well, you're lying, because there's things in life that matter more than others, and you devote more time, more energy, and money. But we as followers of Jesus, our lives should look like we value Christ, right? When we say we're devoted and living devoted, it should, if we looked at our wallet, if we looked at our bank account, if we looked at our time sheet, if you looked at, the energy we spent, it should look like it's surrounding and being rooted in Christ and who God is. And so I want to just ask you a few questions today, and we'll kind of have a discussion on living devoted, because I think it matters. And so really the first thing I want to look at when we talk about devotion is naturally people think Bible reading, praying, worship, right? Off the bat, if I said devoted, what comes to mind? You're thinking, some Christians are thinking those things. Those are great, essential, needed, right? But sometimes we fall off and start making a life devoted to Christ more of a task-driven, type of job rather than a relationship. So really the question is, how do we keep us following Jesus a relationship and not just some task and not just some job that we clock in and clock out, as Christians? How do we keep a life living, following Jesus, devoted to Him, a relationship and not a task?
So I think, the key word in your question for me would be relationship. I know that, even everybody who is watching online, or just everybody in general, we all have relationships. Yeah. So, even if we're bad at them, we have them, right? Like we have relationship, maybe you're in a marriage relationship, or you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or even friends, family. Those are all relationships. Co-workers, those are relationships. Yeah. And I think the important thing to remember is when you're in a relationship, that's like asking somebody like, how do I do marriage? Yeah. Like if somebody were to ask us like, hey, how do I do marriage? I'd be like, well, it's not really something that you do. It's something that you like, that you're in, you know what I mean? I don't do being a wife. I am a wife. And I think you just have to gauge, your relationships that way, because if I always looked at our marriage as a task or something, boxes that I have to check off, I don't think there would be a lot of depth in our relationship if it was truly just, I have to do these things, right? Like I have to go on date night with him. I guess I have to show him a little bit of affection. I guess I have to, if that was my heart behind it, I don't think our relationship would be as fulfilling as it could be. If I am waking up every day saying I'm devoted to my husband, I'm devoted to being a good wife, I think everything else flows out of that. All of my fruit will flow from that. And I think the most important thing to remember too is that I think sometimes as Christians, honestly, I think we set ourselves these like astronomical expectations that we wouldn't, somebody who's accepting Christ for the first time, like we wouldn't place these crazy expectations on them. So why do we do it to ourselves? And I understand I don't want you to like misconstrue my words and be like, oh, well, because, there's maturity levels in your walk, in your relationship with Christ. obviously. But I think sometimes the expectation and the pressure we place on ourselves to do certain things, and that's the measure of where we're at. If I do enough things, then I'll, this is where I'm at in my relationship. But the reality is, if we were basing it on how many things that we do or how many tasks we can accomplish, even if it's in the name of wanting to get better, you're going to place a pressure and an expectation on yourself that you will never be able to live up to. And that'll only end in disappointment and you feeling like your relationship is not in a good place with God.
So I think you said something really great. And so again, to kind of answer that question, that how do we keep following Jesus in a relationship? I think it's looking at what we're measuring this following Jesus. Is it I measure task, what I accomplish, or am I measuring fruit? You kind of mentioned that, but I wanted to state that. I think keeping a relationship with Jesus is more about the fruit than it is how many checks, boxes you can check off.
And even if you look in the Bible and you see scriptures about, the fruit that we produce in our lives, and you see that Jesus is very clear when he talks about how he looks at the heart and not necessarily like our actions or the things that we do, because I always like to use the parallel of, the Pharisees and the apostles, right? The Pharisees and the apostles were essentially doing the same things. They were both equally as devoted to what they were doing. The Pharisees were devoted in terms of tasks. They were devoted. The Pharisees were, and they were on it like clockwork. But they did not have a relationship with God. And the apostles, you see that they were also devoted in their tasks and the things that they were doing. 100, night and day comparison in their relationship with God. So I think you always have to remember, it's not necessarily the task that you're doing. It's the intentionality behind it. It's the heart behind it, because I won't always, especially like me personally, as a mother, as a wife, as somebody who's in full-time ministry, I do not always have the luxury to wake up in the mornings and have my coffee on the back porch and have this amazing, Holy Spirit-filled hour with God. And sometimes I do, and that's great, and I absolutely love that. But it's not always like that. So if I gauged my relationship with God based on how many of those 5 a.m. coffee, prayer, journal times I had, to be very truthful, like on this podcast, I feel like I would be like, my relationship is not good. But that's not true, because I don't measure it off of that. I measure it off of the fruit in my life, my intentionality with the time that I do have and the things that I do pursue in my day in order to keep my relationship with God on the up and up.
And I think having people around you that are, receiving from the fruit that you're producing and that can tell you like, hey, I think it's a little sour right now. I think that also helps. I think God specifically places people around us. That's why community is so important. Church is so important, because you start getting surrounded by community, guys, males, females, or whatever, right? And you start surrounding yourself by them, other followers, that they'll tell you like, hey, your fruit's a little sour. Now they're not going to literally tell you that. But they will kind of say like, hey, are you okay? Are you all right? It's kind of like a fruit check, which is really saying like, hey, you may be doing all these things, but you're not producing any fruit. So what is all this being rooted out of? Is it trying to look a certain way, or am I doing this because it's rooted in an actual relationship, because I genuinely fall in love with Jesus?
Right. And I kind of want to, go back to like the marriage parallel. It's not... I explained it, we were kind of talking about it a little bit earlier, and I don't want to mess it up, but I said I don't do
this because I want a relationship with you.
Right. I'm doing this because I'm in the relationship with you, not I'm in the relationship, so I'm doing this. You know what I mean? Because I'll put it for you guys this way. Like when we got married, we received a marriage license, right? And that piece of paper by law says that I'm married to you. If I base my relationship with like, oh, I have this piece of paper, this is what it says, this is what I should do, then, like I said earlier, that wouldn't produce a very healthy marriage. But if I woke up every day and I was intentional and authentic in our relationship, I would naturally do those things that it would take to stay in a marriage, except it would be healthier because it would be authentic and not just checking off boxes.
For sure. But I do want to say too, I don't think we can also, I don't think no one's thinking this, but so we can talk about it, is I think we also can't negate that if we don't set time apart. We talked about on Sunday, setting a place, setting a time, having a plan, being intentional about the 168 hours that we have a week, and realizing that 1 hour a Sunday service is not enough. We would be lying to ourselves thinking like we can have this relationship, because so many Christians get away with like, oh, like I'm with Jesus all the time. Like, but really though, like, are we really? So how do we have like quickly kind of love to hear from you is how do we keep talking about devotion? How do we keep a healthy perspective when it comes to our works? Because we cannot negate and say like, oh, like, yes, we're not saved because of our works. That doesn't mean we don't work, right? And so, yes, the Bible reading matters, the prayer time matters, right? So how do we keep a healthy perspective on our works so we don't overdo it, but then we also don't make excuses and not do anything at all?
I think it's genuinely falls on your convictions, because I heard a quote from Lisa Bevere that I love, and she was talking about how the Lord had told her one time, like, I don't love each of my children the same. I love them uniquely. And so when you think about that, you see how everybody has a unique relationship with God. And just in the same way, I know I keep paralleling it to marriage, but just so it might make sense to somebody who's newer to faith, our marriage is not the same as Pastor Bronson and Pastor Kristen. It's not the same as Pastor Justin and Victoria's marriage, so our needs and our schedule, our rhythm and our routine looks different. It does not mean that we don't have just as strong of a marriage or just as good of a connection. It just means that it looks different. So I think we have to remember in our relationship with God, sometimes God is going to require things of you, but if you're not listening, if you're not engaging with him, you're not going to know what those things are. So like maybe for somebody, they have devoted, maybe somebody, and I know we always kind of like make fun. I think it's absolutely incredible how some people can wake up at 5 a.m. every day and read the Bible and stuff. That's amazing. And I think some people are called to that, and that's the conviction they have in their walk. Other people are called to fast, called to water fast for a week or 2 weeks, and that's what God has called them, but they're listening so they can receive that information and say, okay, God, this is what you're asking me to do. So I think you have to genuinely go to God and ask, based off of our relationship and my conviction, I want to come to you and ask, what do you want from me in this season? And because that might even honestly, and this will kind of mess with some people's religion, but sometimes the Lord might literally be asking you to spend more time with your family. Sometimes he might be saying like, hey, I want you to read the Bible, yes, but go for a walk with your kids. Like, there are things we can do in our lives that we don't even realize are super spiritual, and they're also very practical. So I think you have to take it relationship by relationship, and just genuinely go to the Father and receive that from him. Yeah, and he'll give you the conviction.
I was hearing the message about devotion real quick. I want to ask you another question is, I started thinking about, because Pastor Steve hadn't been here for about a month, and, and Pastor Steve and Melissa, our founding pastors at LTL, were here, but he didn't speak. And I started just thinking, I'm like, he hasn't been on stage, he hasn't been in the meetings, he's our founding pastors. They have some, work that they're doing on their house that they're, and down in Seadrift. And I just started thinking, like, I almost would love to ask him, because I know his heart, what he would answer this with, but I think it would be so helpful for people. But I can assume that he would say, if I were to ask him, because I wanted to say, Pastor, like, are you still reading, praying, right, fasting? His answer would be, of course, yes. And I would love to ask him why. You're not speaking on stage every Sunday. You're not leading, in the meetings right now. You're you know what I mean? You're busy trying to build a house.
Right.
Why are you still praying? Like, why does it matter? I would love to hear him, because he would genuinely say, because I genuinely love Jesus.
And I'm devoted.
I am devoted to him because I love him. Yeah. And I wonder how many Christians, if they didn't have stages, if we didn't have, conferences, Sunday sermons, classes, because you're not quote unquote pastoring someone. I wonder how many Christians would stop reading the Bible, praying, worshiping, if that was taken away. And that's a scary thought. And I think that's something we should all ask ourselves. Because if our reading and prayer and worship stop when we don't have a mic in our hand, then I genuinely want to ask ourselves, like, then why are we doing this in the first place? If it's not if it's for stage, not instead of love, because I genuinely love Jesus, the way a husband should say, because I genuinely love my wife, then we really need to reconsider our our values and
Yeah.
what matters most in our life. But I just love what you were saying. That's what it made me think of. Like, I thought of Pastor Stephen, like,
And it's and the other side of that too is I'm sure in that same conversation that you would ask him, like, have you been doing these things? Absolutely. But I also guarantee you that you could even ask him, like, does it look different right now? Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of our relationship with God. It ebbs and flows. And if we, just to encourage anybody watching this, if we do not remember that our life, our walk is going to ebb and flow, it's not always going to look the same, that will alleviate our disappointments. That'll alleviate us feeling like we're not doing enough, like we're not being enough, because God will be able to reassure us that, sometimes it just looks different, but it's still so powerful and it's still so good. It keeps us connected. So.
Yeah, I want to ask you another one. Because when we talk about devotion, there's a reality where, let's use the F word.
What did he say?
Right? We don't feel like it. Sly just was drinking.
They're all
Everyone, our whole audience here was doing their own thing, and literally I said that they're all. What did this podcast turn into?
He's like,
oh my gosh.
Local pastor.
But no, right. So let's use the F word, right? Let's use the F word, because the reality is when it comes to being devoted to Christ, there's a lot of times where we don't feel like it. Whether we don't feel him or we just don't feel like following. That's just the reality, right? We like to put like, oh, I just got busy. I'm like, no, you genuinely in your flesh didn't feel like following Jesus today.
Yeah.
You didn't feel like walking behind him or walking hand in hand with him.
Yeah.
Right? Our daughter right now is at a stage where when she doesn't feel like it, she just drops to the floor, literally lays down.
Same.
And puts all her weight down the floor, like, and I'm like, what are we doing, right? And I'm like, we gotta go, right?
Yeah.
How many times do we look like that during the week? So my question is our feelings, all of us, is our feelings a good excuse or good enough excuse to not live devoted?
Well, I mean, this simple answer is no.
Yeah.
Like,
Why?
no, it's not. And because, our feelings, are real, okay?
Yes.
And I used to say, I honestly, and I've corrected myself over the years, I used to say, like, my feelings are valid, right? But even that's not true. Sometimes our feelings are not valid.
Yeah.
But they're real. They're very
they're
real.
real.
And I'm experiencing real feelings, but that does not make them valid and it does not make them true.
Yeah.
And I think if we lived our lives based off of our feelings, we'd have the most inconsistent, crazy lives ever, because sometimes I don't feel like waking up at 4 a.m. to put Leah back to sleep. Sometimes I don't feel like going to work, but then I won't get paid. Like sometimes I don't feel like, whatever, taking care of my, there's just so many things you can insert that wherever you want.
Yeah.
But if we based our lives off of what we were feeling, I think our lives would look pretty crazy. And I think the biggest thing to remember is that a lot of people, I love this when people, because for those of you who don't know, Pastor Doric and I were youth pastors for a good number of years, and I remember having so many conversations with students, and they would tell me, I don't feel God. When I pray, I don't hear anything. When I worship, I don't feel anything. I don't feel this. And I didn't have the words to say to them back then. And now I genuinely feel like I've come to a really good conclusion in that space. And I wish I could go back and tell all those students that were feeling that way that a lot of times when we're in that season of our lives where we don't feel like we're hearing him, or we don't feel like he's working, or sometimes, let's be honest here, and I'll be the first person to say that I've 100% felt disappointed in God. I've been mad at him. I've been frustrated with him. I felt cheated by him.
Wow. Yeah.
So all of those things I have personally felt in my life. So, but I've always found that when I was able to go to God and say, God, this is how I'm feeling. This is how I feel. God is able to take all of my feelings and then in turn give me the beautiful facts that I am chosen, I am loved, he is there for me. And it might not always feel that way, but you see it in the fruit of your life. You will see it eventually. And so I would say for anybody who is in that space right now, it's such an encouragement, because can you imagine if you and I were in a relationship and I pretended like if there was a genuine issue in our marriage, or maybe just even something small that was bothering me and I couldn't tell you, that would say a lot about where the depth in our marriage is, right?
Yeah.
But if I can be honest with you and say, hey, there's something that you've been doing or saying or not doing, and it's really bothering me, and it's really starting to make me question or doubt our relationship. you don't think that we'd have a great conversation and gain more depth and strength in our marriage from that? So it's the same thing with God. If you feel this way, go to God.
Yeah.
He can handle even us being angry with him. But you know what that tells me? When I can even go to God with my anger and my frustrations, it tells me that there's a genuine relationship there. That I can go to my Father and say, hey, I'm just like, I'm pretty frustrated with this, or I feel like you're not listening. I feel like you're not here for me. And I think that's such a beautiful place to be in. So if you're in that place and you're watching, honestly, and you feel like you're in that space and it's discouraging to you, please understand that the Lord is near in our times of trouble. It says in the Bible that he sticks closer than a brother. And when we're going through things, God he's listening, and he's there, and he wants to hear your feelings and give you truth in exchange for sometimes like the lies that the enemy puts in our head.
I also just add on the feelings. Yes, they're real, but they're also not the best indicators of whether or not God is present or not.
100%.
Like, feelings are not the thermometer of the Holy Spirit. Right. And so if we can grow maturity. I could
literally be hungry, and that can change my feelings. You know what I mean? So it's so fickle and it's so fleeting. So we cannot gauge our God based off of our feelings.
So I think it's important us continually living a life devoted to Christ, rooted in a relationship, not in our works, finding why we're here and realizing how much, going back to what Jesus said in Revelation, talking to the 7 churches, he said, you forgot your first love. I think it's always getting back to remembering our first love, remembering what Christ did for us and who he is. And so before we kind of, finish up today, I want to give you my segment of Own It or Loan It. Okay, real quick, rapid fire.
Bop or flop.
You go. This is not a bop or flop. This is Own It or Loan It, okay? Okay, the first one is Dutch Bros. Own it or loan it?
Loan it.
Loan it? I'm loaning it too. Don't give it to me. Give it to me. Throw it to me. Right here. Right here.
Toss it.
Own it or loan it.
Can
right
you imagine
here.
if somebody from Dutch Bros was watching this? Please sponsor
Mr. Dutch.
Mr. Dutch himself.
We would love you to sponsor us.
The brothers.
The bros.
Where's the brothers?
Okay, you're loaning it. All right. The airport process, not flying, but like the whole airport check-in bag.
Own it 100%.
Own it. I love it.
100%.
I love it.
I would say that's a part of the vacation. That's a part of the process.
Yes, absolutely.
I love it.
Thin crust pizza.
Loan it 100%. That's trash.
Oh, that's Daniel.
Listen, it's trash.
No.
And if I'm gonna eat a pizza, it's not gonna be thin crust, baby.
Oh, no. Thin crust, man.
It's
All the
gonna
way.
be Thique.
I'm telling you.
No, Thique. That's what it's gonna be.
Thick. Okay. I had to spell that out. No. You want to talk about feelings. You want your feelings to lie to you. When you get a thin crust, you can eat that whole thing and not feel guilty. And I'm telling you, that's the best feeling in the world. You're like, I didn't eat a whole pizza. I mean, I ate it, but it was thin crust. It was healthier.
It was
healthier.
If I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna go away.
And the last one, driving. You actually driving, not in the passenger seat. You driving, owning or loaning.
Oh, it's a scam. It's a scam.
I told you.
It's a scam. 100%.
A scam?
It's a scam. I don't ever want to drive again in my life. Listen, for those of you who don't know, I got my license when I was 15. I got a hardship license, so I've been driving, bruh. I've been driving. I'm so sick of it. Like I don't ever want to drive. I can't wait till we.
I like to drive. I like to drive. I'm owning it.
I hate driving.
Yeah. Hope so.
Loan it for sure.
But hey, thank you so much. I love you. I love your wisdom. Thank you for having the conversation with me today. This is one of the minis that we have all throughout our day in life.
It's been fun.
And so for everyone watching, hey, continue to subscribe, like, share these videos and content. Follow us on social media at LTL.Church. And we'd love to see you in person on a Sunday morning at 10 or 12 p.m. But if not, continue to watch our midweek conversations that come out every week. We love you guys, and we'll see you back here next week.